Okay, I'm going to just talk about the basic switch configuration, or I guess we call it basic device configuration because when we put devices out in the field, whether it's in a knock or at a customer location, for instance, we're going to have to do some configuration for those things to work. Like there are some things that we need to put in there, like what's the name of it? We're gonna have to name it so we can distinguish it between others. We're gonna have to do some basic security, put some passwords in it, and we don't want to just default one of those and let it go without any settings in it. We may want to turn on some remote management, for example, and we may want to set up uh, some some basic configuration like VLANs. We'll look at VLANs in the next course, but that would be something that would normally do on a switch. So I'm going to show you kind of what that switch is made up of. When we turn the switch on, what's going to happen is that switch is hardware. What's going to happen is that switch is going to boot up, and the way it does is it basically goes and looks at a bin file or a binary file, and it pulls that into memory, and that's your kernel. So when you think of a kernel, you can think of it as if it was an actual seed. So I'm just going to let's look at popcorn, right? So popcorn kernel, yeah. And when I had that idea of this popcorn kernel, what is it? Well, we know what popcorn looks like, but what it looks like beforehand is it looks like this hard seed. So on the inside of the kernel, I can't, when I'm holding that kernel in my hand, I can't have access to that. But it has a hard thing on the outside we call a shell. And so the shell is the only thing I can touch. I can't touch the inside. Right? And so that's exactly the model that we see in our devices. We have some hardware inside. The kernel is the operating system that basically gets loaded, that is there for us. The shell is the program that runs that allows us to interact with the kernel and through it, the hardware. But when we're looking at Windows, we also have a shell. In this case, the shell is a graphical user interface, but I also have a command prompt. Right? So this is a command line interface. It's a program that gets run, it gets executed. We call it invocation. So the switch does the same thing when it boots up. It loads up information into memory, and the iOS system then executes its shell as you watch the machine boot up, and then you are all of a sudden given a prompt. So I can run any command that I want. If I do that, I get a list of files, dir directory, right? And that is essentially there's a command that gets to be run, and it gives me a report on what files are there on the system. And switches have similar shells. It's a user interface. It allows me to access the configuration. So you want to look through the access methods, but in here we have a couple of different ways to do that. We could access the device through a cable, otherwise known as a console. This is a physical management port. We would plug in a console cable. So in our packet tracer, when we have a system here, this cable is represented by a direct link between my PC and my switch. So when I click on that, notice that I have several different ports that I could plug into. In a real cable instance, I'm going to have a USB port. There are some PCs that would that would have a 9-pin serial port that would plug into it. In this case, we don't really know in this case what this PC has. We're just going to assume that it's an RS-232 port, a 9-pin connector. So we plug that in there, and the other side gets plugged into our switch in the console port. Now this is a cable called a rollover cable. It's discussed in the text. It's called a rollover cable because it's flat, and so I could roll over it with my chair. All right. But once I do that connection, I have the ability in this case to see the shell. And what happens at first is when I power on that machine and that device is that I get some information about the boot up sequence. You can see that it is actually loading the kernel. It's loading that module into memory. And then it began to do a system check. It began to report to me that there's certain hardware that's available to me. It began to start to test how much memory is available, CPU registered. It begins to talk to all of these things that are waiting to hear from it, and those hardware components respond. It gives me some copyright information, and then some status information, and then it basically dumps me into the shell. And so it's ready there at that point to take a command from me. And I gave it a command, in this case, the question mark. And there it goes and tells me that I have certain commands that are available in this case. So what I will do is I will I'm going to plug into a different switch. So I'm just going to plug into that switch right there. And now because I'm using the console port, I have to actually go in and use the terminal emulator software on the PC, which is what that is looking at. And now I can see that particular switch, and I can see its boot up sequence, and it is waiting for me to press enter. And there I have the host name of the switch, and I am in user exec mode right now. I don't have any privileges. Okay. If I press the question mark key, I get a little bit of help. Right? It tells me what commands that I can do. And I can't do too many things. I can check the status of the switch. I can suspend or resume the connection. I can maybe do some network checks, but other than that, I can't do a whole lot. I have to actually go into the next mode of operation, which is the enable mode or privileged mode, privileged exec mode. And the way I do that is I use the enable command. So this particular iOS software or the shell that I'm interacting with understands that when I type in en, that it's going to search for a command that is similar to that. And I press tab, it's going to auto-complete it. And I press enter, and now I'm looking at the privileged exec mode. And that's denoted by that little hash sign right there. Right? So if I do question mark right there, I get a nice long list of commands. And notice that if I do that again, as it displays some of them, it will tell me there's more. So I can hit space and see the rest. But these are all of the commands I can do, and there are more than there were originally. If I want to get out of privileged mode, I can hit exit, type exit, and I'm back in user exec mode. I can only do a few things. I'm going to go ahead and go into privileged exec mode by enabling that. Now, a lot of times what I would do is my initial setup is I'm going to put in a password so that only the person that knows the password can get into privileged exec mode. What would happen is it would actually give me a password screen. I'm going to go ahead and set one real quick. And I'm going to put the enable password to be Cisco. Now, this particular password is not encrypted right now. If I were to look at the configuration, I would be able to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And as you can see, this is the only thing I put in there is the host name that's a default, and then the enable password Cisco, right? So that is not very secure. But for right now, we'll keep it there. And then now another thing that I have to do is I have to write the configuration in order to save it. I'm going to copy that configuration. The running configuration to the startup configuration. So that way that anytime that switch gets restarted and it starts up, it's going to load my configuration for me. And then now watch what happens when I get out of user privileged exec mode and I'm back in user exec mode. If I want to go back into privileged exec mode, I get asked the password. Now, this is the first thing that happens every time we do these activities. Is the first thing a student says, it's not taking my password. It won't work. It won't work. And you're correct. It is it's not showing a password actually. So it's taking it, but it's just not showing it. So it will. It's called no local echo, and this is a security feature. It's not a bug. So I'm going to type in my password, and notice my cursor's not moving. It looks like nothing's happening, but I'm going to press enter, and there I am. So now I am in to my privileged exec mode. Now, if I get back out of it, I do enable again. Ask me for the password. I have to type it in and press enter, and there I am. There's my privileged exec mode. Again, I have a lot more commands that I can do. None of these commands will allow me at this point to configure the switch. I have to go into configuration mode in order to do that. And I'm going to do a little shortcut. Instead of it asking me which mode I'm going to use to configure, I'm just going to use terminal mode with a T. Config T. Or I can type in conf T. And now the submenu indicates that I am in configuration mode. I can make all kinds of changes. Look, I got a lot more commands that I can do here. And they're all different. So lots of different things that that I couldn't do before to actually do some configuration. The only thing is that as I configure, I just have to remember once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and put in the host name and I'm going to call it switch 123. I do have to remember that I need to exit configuration mode and I need to copy from the running config to the startup config, and I'm pressing the first few characters of the command and tab. It's going to ask me for a file name, and I'm going to press enter because that was the default, right? Another way to do that is a shortcut right. And I get the same thing. So that's going to help you through that basic router configuration. And if you have questions, of course, you're able to communicate with me or any other course communication method for help.